Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another episode of Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and today we're going to take a look at Dragonwood. This is a game that was put out by Gamewright. It is a 2 to 4 player game that takes roughly half an hour to an hour to play. It is a competitive game, so each player is working against the other players to gain the most victory points by the end of the game. And so the overview of the game is that you're a group of adventurers that has gone into a magical forest called Dragonwood, and you're trying to compete with each other to kill the most monsters and gain the most items to aid you on your journey. By the end of the game, the player that has defeated the most monsters and has the most victory points will be the overall winner of the game. So my impressions of this game is that I do enjoy the game. I think it is a good game, and I think it's really good for families. It is the rules for it are very easy. The artwork is fun and well done, and it is a dice chucking game, which I enjoy. And it's also a strategy game. You'll have each player will have a certain number of cards that are dealt to them, and over the game you will spend those cards to perform captures on monsters. Which there are 3 different types of captures: strike, stomps, and screams. So you're going to have to, each monster will have different ratings for those, and you'll have to decide how you want to play those based on the cards that you have. Each card that you play will grant you a dice that you're going to be able to roll, so the more cards you play, the more dice you can roll to try to capture that monster or special item that will aid you on capturing those monsters. So let's head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. Here we have the Dragonwood dice that are included in the game. These are 6-sided dice that will have the values that we can see here. So you have 1 1 on the dice, 2 2s, 2 3s, and 1 4. Here we have examples of the 3 different types of cards that make up the Dragonwood deck, which is the greenback deck. The first one are creatures, which are the greenback cards. They have the name of the creature at the top, its picture, the number of victory points it's worth, and the values to capture it for each of the values, which are strike, stomp, and scream. Next we have enhancement cards, which are the purple-backed border cards. With those cards, once you capture them, then they will be played face up in front of the player that captured them, and will add effects to that player when he's trying to capture other creatures. So for example, with this one, it's a magical unicorn. We have its picture, and it says that it adds 1 point to all capture attempts. From here, we have the values again to capture this card initially. After that, we have the event card. When these cards come up into the landscape, you must resolve them immediately. You'll read the text at the bottom out loud, and all players must follow it. Once the players do, then this card is discarded and the landscape is refilled as normal, which we're going to take a closer look at during that phase. The other deck that you'll be working with is the red-backed deck or adventurer deck. With this deck, it is comprised of cards from 5 different suits with numbers from 1 to 12 in each suit. There's also 4 lucky ladybug cards in there. When you draw one of these cards, you will immediately draw 2 additional cards, and then this card gets discarded into the discard pile. To set up a game of Dragonwood, the first thing you're going to do is grab the Dragonwood deck, which is the greenback deck. Go ahead and remove the 2 dragons from it, and then you can go ahead and give it a shuffle. From here, based on the number of players you're playing, as you can see in this chart, you will remove randomly a certain number of cards. So we're going to play a 2-player game, so we're going to go ahead and randomly remove 12 cards. These cards will be added back to the box and will not be used for this game. From here, then we're going to go ahead and add the dragons back into the back half of the deck, and then from there the deck will be placed out on the field, and you'll flip over the top 5 cards from the deck. Any event cards will be removed from the initial draw, and new cards will be put out, and these cards will be added back into the deck somewhere. From here, you can go ahead and grab the Adventurer deck, which is the red-back deck. Go ahead and give it a shuffle, and deal out 5 cards to each player. And then this deck can go out on the field. Go ahead and add the dice out there, and then each player can have one of the turn summary cards. The last couple things we need to do before we're ready to start the game are to choose a starting player, which you can do by having each player roll a dice and the player that has the highest value can go, or by simply selecting a player that you'd like to have go first. So we're going to go ahead and have our player over here start first. Each player is going to go ahead and look at their cards in their hand and keep them hidden from other players. If any player was dealt a lucky ladybug at the beginning of the game, then go ahead and discard that and add it back into the deck and shuffle the deck up again and then draw back out so that all players have 5 cards that do not contain lucky ladybugs. From here, then the player's turn will start with the player that is the first player, and during a player's turn, they're allowed to do one action, which is either to reload or capture. So the first option players have is to reload. To reload, a player will draw the top card from the adventurer's deck, and as long as it's not a ladybug card, they'll just add it to their hand. If it is a ladybug card, then they would be able to discard the ladybug card and draw 2 cards into their hand. From here, each player is allowed to have a maximum of 9 cards in their hand at any time. If they draw a card past 9, then they can go ahead and add that card to their hand, and then they must choose a card from their hand to discard to bring them back down to 9 cards. The other option players have to do during their turn is called a capture. And there are 3 different ways that you can capture a card from the landscape, and each of those ways is to strike, stomp, or scream, which we're going to take a closer look at now. The first way is to strike, which is to play cards in sequence, which can come from any color deck. So in this first example, we have cards in sequence of 3, 4, 5, and 6. And as you can see, these are from 3 different decks, the blue, purple, and orange deck. The next way is to stomp, which is to use the same number on different colored cards. So in our second example here, we have 3 9s from 3 different suits. The third way is to scream, which is to use the same color, but any number cards. So in our third example here, we have 2 cards from the green suit. So from here, let's go ahead and go back to our player that's its turn. So our first player did a reload, so our second player now is the player that's going to go. So we're going to go ahead and try to capture one of the creatures or enhancements. And these are the cards that we have to work with. So he has 2 greens, 2 orange, and a purple. He just so happens to have 3 2s though, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and play the 3 2s from his hand, which will qualify for a stomp. From here, we're going to go ahead and look at the stomp values of the cards, and one of these enhancements would really be helpful for us. So let's go after the magical unicorn, which has a stomp of 6. So we've played 3 cards for a stomp, which will give us 3 dice, 1 dice per card. From here, we're going to go ahead and roll the dice and see if we can roll equal to or greater than a 6. So we rolled a 3, 4, 5. When we fail to meet the card's requirements, then we would take these cards and add them back to our hands. Once we do that, then we would choose 1 card from our hand as a wound and place it in the discard. But for this example, let's go ahead and say that we rolled this value instead, which is a 6, which would meet the requirements of that. When we do, we would take this enhancement and add it to our fields so that we can use it in later turns. Any cards we use to capture are going to be discarded into the discard pile. From here, we're going to go ahead and flip over the top card of the Dragonwood deck. If it's an event card, then we're going to go ahead and resolve it immediately. So this card says that all players draw 2 cards. So each player is going to get 2 cards. And then this card will be discarded, and the next card will be flipped over. From here, that player's turn is over. All right, so now that this player's turn is done, we're going to go back to our first player, and let's go ahead and take a look at another example of a capture. So we'll flip over his cards to see what he has. All right, so let's go ahead and use his 3 purple cards, which will qualify us for a scream, which again is using cards from the same deck, but in different number values. So from here, we're going to go ahead and look at our values of screams, and we're going to go ahead and go risky and try to go after the hungry bear, which is a 9. So as normal, we would get 3 dice, 1 dice for each of the cards, and we're going to go ahead and give them a roll. and we just missed it. We rolled an 8, which is less than our scream value of 9, so we have failed to do it. So when we fail, we'll add our cards back to our hands, and then look at our hands and choose one card to discard from that hand as a wound. And it does not have to be any of the cards that we used, so next turn we can try again and see if we get any luckier. Now, the one other thing with creature cards, if we would have been able to defeat the Hungry Bear, then we would have removed his card as normal and added it face down to a victory pile for each player. And again, we would refill the landscape with 5 cards, and as normal, that player's turn would be over. You're only allowed to try to capture 1 creature or enhancement per turn. Now, there's a couple other things I'd like to cover about capturing real quick. The first is enhancements. The enhancements that you have already captured, you cannot use their abilities to capture additional enhancements. You can only use them to capture other creatures. The other thing with capturing is that you can play anywhere between 1 and 6 cards. You are not allowed to play any more than 6 cards in order to capture a creature or enhancement. And again, same with the dice. You can only use up to 6 dice, 1 per card as usual, up to 6. Now, when you play a single card in order to capture, then you can choose any of the 3 options, the strike, stomp, or scream action with that card. Now, there are 2 different conditions that will end the game. The first is as you go through the Dragonwood deck, when the dragons come out, which there are 2 of them, when those 2 dragons are defeated, then the game will be over immediately. The other way to end the game is to go through the adventure deck 2 times. After the second time, when the deck has been gone through, every player will get 1 final turn, and then the game will be over. And then you'll move into the scoring phase. So now that the game is over, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the scoring. The first thing we're going to do is each player will count up the number of creatures that they have in their victory pile, which player 1 has 4 and player 2 has 3. The player that has the most creatures will receive 3 bonus victory points, so player 1 has received 3 additional victory points. From there, then each player is going to count up the number of victory points that they have on the side of each monster. So player 1 here has 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 6, which is 11, plus the 3 bonus points that he won for having the most creatures, so he ends the game with 14. Player 2 will do the same, and so he has 7 points, plus 3 for 10, and 1 more for 11. So player 1 has won with 14 points, and the game is over.